But we always start, Steve, by just saying, a big thank you to you, should I say, for giving up some of your time this Friday morning, especially, I should say, at the end of the first week back to school. And I know that you mentioned previously that the weekend can't come soon enough. So thank you for giving up some of your time on this Friday.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Top man. So, Steve, as you know, the first kind of period of each show, we're keen to learn a bit more about our guests. I know that you've got a particularly interesting kind of background and experience. I think when it's talking about yourself, I'm really keen to understand kind of those pivotal moments of kind of inspiration and motivation that have led you to do what you're doing from an impact perspective, from a sustainability point of view. In the nature of our show, we're interested in kind of hearing what inspired people to do what they do. So feel free to start wherever you want to start. Some people go way back. Some people will make it a bit sort of recent. But give us a flavor of you and your background.
Yeah, of course. So I've listened to a number of your podcasts. I've listened to a number of your guest intros. There's a surprising number that sort of start with, I left university and I didn't really know what to do with my life. So I left university not really knowing what to do with my life. And actually, I'm being a little bit facetious because I studied ecology. I'm not a very good ecologist, as my friends like to remind me 23, 24 years later. But my thesis was a desk-based study, but oil pollution in the Shetland Isles. And you couldn't pay me to read my own thesis now. I think I would cringe. But I think the essence of it was really what companies say versus what they do. And so I left university with sort of like that in mind, thinking that there's something in this, and I wasn't quite sure what it was. So whilst my ecology colleagues are off counting badgers and butterflies or whatever, and they've gone to have really great ecology careers, I was sort of like stuck a little bit. But there was something in there, but I couldn't articulate it. I joined I guess we called ourselves an environmental consultancy, and we actually were producing environmental reports, sort of pre-sustainability reports, for some quite big clients in the financial services and water industry. I think we had two big clients. We were a very small consulting firm. So we're doing the environmental reporting. And I remember one day, the managing director sort of came in with 3 consultants and sort of said, I keep hearing about this CSR, should we call ourselves a CSR consulting instead of environmental consulting firm? We sort of looked at each other and went, yeah, sure, why not? I think it's probably one of the most dynamic decisions that I've ever been involved in my career, like 30 seconds. But, it was a reflection of something happening sort of in the background. And I was there a couple of years. I got exposure. We were doing quite a lot on stakeholder dialogue to help produce these reports on behalf of these clients. And there's one stakeholder group that was certainly quite niche, but I mean, it really sparked my fire. Was I guess they were called sustainability analysts or responsible investment analysts in some of those asset manager firms that were having teams and looking at some of these sustainability issues through that financial lens, that there is a cost or a risk. And that was really fascinating to me. So I actually left the consulting and went into the rating agency world, those early days CSR sustainability rating agencies. And I worked for 2 firms, and none of which now exist. I think there's been so much M&A activity in there, but a real grounding. Actually, I've got real foundation. I was quite fortunate that the companies and industries that I got associated with or applied to with my portfolios were the mining metals companies and the oil and gas, who were very much open to a conversation of a sort of a burgeoning area of investment analysis. And they would invite me into their offices, and I was having conversations with VPs of HSE, and we were sort of coming to sort of like some kind of compromise. And I do think, even years and years later, that was a good approach.
Steve. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but you're brilliantly running through the sort of the early part of your career at this stage. But can we just give our listeners, I think, especially with with, as you say, the decisions made about moving from environmental consultancy to a CSR consultancy, etc. Can we just give an idea of timings on this? Like,
Yeah, of course. And this is where I start showing my age. So it would have been about 2001, 2002. I joined the environmental consulting firm, and we were looking at GRI version 2 at that time. So it had just starting to sort of make some sort of appearance there. And then I would have been working at the rating agencies from 2003 to about 2007. Sorry for that. That gives you some more perspective.
And then coming back to your point there that you crescendo with is that essentially working in those ratings agencies, being exposed to the types of organizations you're working with, gave you a really good grounding and a really good footing in terms of what you then went on to do next, is I think what you're getting.
Yes, yeah. So I think I took those rating agency work as far as I could. You could see some of my colleagues who were going into the asset management side and committing to financial qualifications, and it just it wasn't for me. And I actually got into conversation with that's when I joined the corporate world, moved over to the other side, driven by a large company who wanted to sort of be a bit more forward thinking and actually go out to the market to sell a corporate responsibility strategy, as well as start to answer those questionnaires that are coming from those rating agencies. So I spent, and that's basically the second part of my career. I've been in the corporate world since 2007, worked across a number of industries, metals and mining, oil and gas, utilities, and I've now found a home in nuclear. So since last January, I've been at newcleo, which is we're a very young company, barely 3 years old, and our mission is innovating the nuclear industry, playing that key role in climate change mitigation and decarbonisation. And we're doing that through the development of what we call small modular lead-cooled fast reactors, producing that green energy and what is a real USP for us is recycling existing used nuclear fuel. So a burgeoning company and getting the ability to drive that ESG really from scratch. It's a corporate world since 2007, quite a number of industries. I wouldn't sort of describe myself as an expert in any of those industries, but more just that sustainability and ESG experience. I've had more success in the heavy industry. I don't know why I'm attracted to working with engineers, but there's something in there that I am. And also, I think, which has been a really good grounding, is that had plenty of opportunities to sort of step out of that ivory tower and work on the ground. So I've lived in old shipping containers in oil projects in Kurdistan, and I think one of the other longest projects I ever worked on was a hydroelectric plant in the Himalayas of India. So up high and cold for a good couple of weeks. So not really what I was expecting when I left university and sort of had that ecology grounding. And I sort of kind of keep reminding myself that is my background, but really had to go where the wind's taken me.
And Steve, that, by the way, that was an absolutely brilliant kind of 5-minute synopsis of things. You're not going to get away with that too easily as that. I'm going to pry in a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
When thinking back to what led you to doing a degree in ecology, was concern about environment, about ecology, etc. Was that something that was sort of very much part of your makeup from your early experiences? Was there anything in particular that stimulated this in you as being an area of focus?
No, I don't think there actually was. It was like just a natural progression. I'd started out at school. I was very much more of a scientist across all the sciences, and just gradually narrowed down to biology. And my undergraduate was biology, and of course you have exposure to all areas. 1 week it's genetics, the other week it was animal behaviour, and then it was just that conservation and ecology part of the degree that just felt more natural. And I don't know whether it was just being outdoors, as simple as that. And then, just my makeup, just an outdoorsy person, I guess. Even now, I try and get outdoors. I've lived abroad and lived in the Middle East, and I couldn't wait to get back to the UK to see some trees and some hills. And maybe it's that kind of embeddedness. But as my career's gone on, as I say, going with the flow, I almost moved away from the environment side, and some of those projects that I mentioned are very community relations focused. So that skill set, that scientific skill set, has become almost like that. I do hate the term softer skills. I think that devalues it a little bit, but those community relations skills have been really important to me. Cultural awareness, and I think this is one of the barriers to ESG, to describing it. You break it down into those three pillars. Let's put governance to one side. This is only an hour podcast, but you've got E and the S. That E is, it's science, it's technical. I was a bad ecologist, but at least I got that bit. That is about plotting data and graphs, essentially. The social is broader. It is, as I say, that those softer skills, empathy, listening, openness, transparency. That's with the community. On that people side, I mean, the best HR managers that I've worked with are essentially psychologists. I worked with somebody who had a PhD in psychology, who was the best HR director I worked with. So those are two very different disciplines, I think, within just ESG itself. And so, certainly I can pinpoint areas of inspiration, but it's almost, that's evolved as my career's evolved. And I've had to adapt. And I think over the last couple of years, maybe I would have shied away from describing, good ESG management as quite a generalist approach. But actually, it's something I really lean into. I work in an industry, I'm surrounded by very, very intelligent people and very technical people. It's intimidating in some cases. So, what am I good at? I'm good at having at least conversation in some area, across a lot of areas. And I think that's also one of the most enjoyable parts about sustainability and ESG management is, one morning I could be talking about scope 3 emissions, and then I go on to another call about mental health and well-being, and then I finish it up with a call with a school about a community engagement education outreach program. And no, that's actually something that's pretty tricky, I think, to do. And that's something that I'm quite proud of, and something that I kind of push.
And Steve, it's super interesting that reflection. Do you use the term "go with the flow" when it came to your career development, if you like? Do you feel like there was a sense of sort of the gut leading new areas of exploration and understanding that have enabled you to then get to this point of having a kind of a broad awareness and understanding of all of these different influences, if you like, which is enabling you to now be able to have the kind of influence that you're having at newcleo in terms of all of those different aspects being factored in? Is that something that plays out in terms of allowing yourself not to be rigid and structured in your career, thinking that I'm this and I'm going to stick to this, but actually you broaden your scope and your
no, very much so. The first part of my corporate career, I pretty much was embedded with the environment team. That was a response, health and safety and environment team, I should say. That was a response to, I sat in both our investor relations team and our corporate responsibility team, because I couldn't go to investors without a corporate responsibility message. So they had to evolve at the same time. But a response to our investment community was around carbon, even in the early days, and carbon disclosure projects, submissions and things like that. But also a response to our safety record, which was, in all honesty, not great. That was our key risk. So I spent, upwards of 5 years. That was my communications to the outside world. So I had to be on top of it in the inside world. So as I say, embedded with those teams. And then when I left the the steel, the mining and metals industry and went to oil and gas, I sort of went with the expectation of, I thought, similar sort of industries,
Mm-hmm.
that they would have those same sort of risks, climate change risks, and both and health and safety risks. And I just from day one, actually, until I was actually in the business, which, as I mentioned, that was abroad, that was in the Middle East, and because the investment community was very different, we weren't being asked those questions. So it was very much an internal look at, and looking at that growth strategy, and going to see those projects, in person, not just operating from the head office. That was really important because then instantly you could make a judgment. So I think one of my first trips was to one of our coal power plants in India that we had in our portfolio. I can't even remember how long it took to get there, but it was a long, bumpy drive, and we got there. And the security guy who had been at the company a lot longer was explaining our plant. And then next door was a government-owned plant, which dwarfed ours. So in that long journey, I instantly realized this is not going to be a risk for us. Any kind of external pressures is going to be focused on the one next door. I mean, it's huge. Ours is tiny. Okay, I'll stay here for a couple of days and I'll go back home. And then I looked at some of our other part of our other growth strategy and some of our other projects. So I mentioned the one in Kurdistan. I went there and immediately saw the community risks. Put very simply, this project was in the very north of the country. It had very few communities, but actually potentially quite disruptive communities. There was a farmer next door. And put very simply, if we upset the farmer, he could have quite easily blocked the road or caused us a lot of problems. So it became entirely about community relations, working with the local security team. How do we keep this one guy on board, and then for the village elders and things like that. So yeah, those environmental sort of background that I had just was not the priority. The priority was the community risk, and that's where that sort of those other skills that hadn't really been tested. So like communication skills, those listening skills, working internally with our security team about how to go about things, how to talk to people, how to. I've got some real war stories of things that could have gone quite wrong just through bad gestures, offensive gesture. We're talking about a very sensitive region and people walking around armed, a lot of kind of security checks and things like that. So, yeah, just an openness to just put in that environmental experience. It's not relevant. It is relevant, but it's not as relevant. This is the focus for the next sort of couple of months, couple of years.
Really interesting, Steve. Really interesting. I've got two more questions about you. One's more specific than the other. And I'm going to start with that. I'm going to start with the more specific one. newcleo, talk us through a little bit of what drew you to joining the company. What was it about the role? What was it about the opportunity, the mission, etc., that led you there?
So I'd had some experience with newcleo when I came back to the UK with a project that was shelved in 2019. So since that time I'd worked for a couple of other companies, a couple of industries, and so I was being drawn back to heavy industry. I think when I first spoke with them, so it was a startup. When I spoke with them, they were, I think, barely 60 people. So the sign that they were already looking for an ESG manager at that early stage was a massive tick. And also, I kind of, our initial question was, my initial suggestion was, you need an ESG committee. You need to, take this seriously. You need a governance structure for this. And the founder of the company, who was essentially my boss, was going to be my boss, and was interviewing me, said, "Oh, we've already set that up." So like, oh, okay. So you've been barely running a few months, you're 50, 60 people, you've already got an ESG board level committee, and you're already looking for an ESG manager. Let me sign me up. But in all honesty, it was about the purpose. It really was about that purpose. So I think I've worked in industries where I always felt that I could do more within than I could outside.
Hmm.
My makeup is not really activist. There are some, very good sort of ESG style activists. I don't know whether that's the right word, but very like passionate. Whereas I'm kind of more pragmatic. I think that's a reflection of the companies that I've worked for, but also I think that's those companies that through the hiring process, that's what they've been looking for. So that's where we suited. So still having that pragmatism, but also that purpose and that mission, really comes through, the innovating the nuclear industry and playing that part in that key role of climate change mitigation, which I guess sort of circles all the way back to my education and really sort of wanting to be able to demonstrate something, within my career that really purposeful. And I do a lot of onboarding. I support the onboarding approach. We just had a new cohort of graduates come through only last week, so got to present sort of the ESG plan. And I always test with my new colleagues and all my existing colleagues that purpose piece. So like a straw poll for everyone. So anyone within newcleo, and we are now 800 people. So that's how much we've grown in 3 years. I mean, it's an incredible growth plan. It's very, very exciting. But I always test that purpose piece. Is that why you joined? And that could be anybody, finance, procurement, HR. It doesn't have to directly relate to ESG and sustainability, but I'd say 95% of people across 3 countries, that purpose piece is really good. And that means you've got great ingredients for an ESG plan. It does sound a little bit cliche because you hear this so many times. That like 2 cliches in ESG that makes me cringe a little bit is one that ESG is in our DNA. Okay, I've heard that so many times. Yeah, but genuinely, just having a founder of the company as a chairman, as a champion of ESG, having an ESG committee, wanting to get an ESG management team in place early days, that's I think a really good sign. And the other cliche is we're on a journey. Every company's on a journey. Every company's on a journey with sustainability. And I think for this one, I'll cut us a little bit of slack. We are 3 years in. We're making incredible progress on our growth plan and our business plan. And ESG is intrinsic to our business because that is our mission. I think where certainly our ESG plan has got to evolve is actually that S part, because those S risks, those people risks and issues, and also those community issues, when we start digging holes in the ground and actually start building our reactors, which will come in a couple of years' time, those community issues won't be at the scale of some of those that I've experienced in the past, but the approach should be the same. I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why I came into nuclear in the first place, because I was working on a large scale project in North Wales, in Anglesey, and I said, well, I know for a fact that my previous manager brought me in because I wasn't a nuclear person, because I did have experience from another industry. And actually, I went in straight away and said, you can apply some of the things that oil and gas industry is doing in the community to nuclear. And actually, doesn't matter where you are in the world, you'll still have cultural barriers. You'll still have language barriers. You have language barriers in Wales, similar to what we had in Kurdistan in Iraq, cultural barriers. So I think that's really, put me in good stead.
And Steve, you tell if I'm prying too closely, then we can cancel this. We can remove this. But what were those lessons that could be drawn from an S perspective from oil and gas that could be applied to nuclear? Can you give us a flavour?
Yeah, I think, put very simply, I kind of touched upon them earlier. Listening is really important. Utilizing local knowledge. I mean, I've got countless examples. I think that the one I've actually got photos of this situation. But when I went to Kurdistan, to get from one area to the other, we had to get in a 4x4 and go through a river with the water coming up to the bonnet. And the reason we had to do that is because the bridge that had been built previously had been swept away as the snows had melted down the mountains. And the problem with this was, if we'd actually listened to the community, that as we were building it, the local elders and the farmers had said, "You're building that bridge too far down the river. It needs to go further up, because when the snows melt, it's going to wash away the bridge." And our contractors, who had all come from US and the UK, all felt that they knew better. And that bridge did get washed away because we were going across in the 4x4, and of course that slowed everything down, delayed the project by a good couple of weeks. So, I mean, simple things like that, just listening to the local community, listening to their concerns and having that empathy. I think that's a real skill. And our managing director actually was really good, and took a lot of commitment, took a lot of time to go up to the site each time, but to meet with local people and give them openness about the progress, what that means, what that's going to deliver, especially in terms of jobs and supply chain. That they are going to be part of the project, I think is very key. And those are similar messages that we sort of brought in when we worked in North Wales. Is like, oh, and actually, I mean, I did a lot of community work and saw we had like a voluntary fund that we gave away some of our money to, based on applications. And there's some really deprived parts of Wales there, of the UK, and it's sort of filling a gap and making sure that those donations are strategic. And not just throwing things out as a sort of a compensation. I think one of the worst sort of starting points for any community investment strategy is giving back to the community. It shouldn't be about giving back. It's about working with the community about what they want, what they need, working together and bringing them in on that journey. And that jobs and supply chain piece is essentially what most people want, really, whatever part of the world you are.
Steve, it's super helpful and interesting. I think that's a really practical, like strategic piece, if you like, for anyone that's considering how they go about approaching similar circumstances where there are concerns around the S of the ESG and they want to do so appropriately. I've done the classic thing that I always do, Steve, of wrapping through a lot of our time talking this morning, getting you and your background and experience, but it's been super interesting. I want to finish with one last question on you. When you, and it's a grand question, and I know, speaking to a pragmatic guy like yourself, it'd be interesting to hear what your response to this is. But when you get to the end of your career and you look back, what are you hopeful that you'll be able to say about what you've done?
It's funny you should ask that. I was trying to describe this to somebody only the other day. It might be a bit extreme, but have you ever seen that cartoon with the little lad sitting on his dad's knee saying, "What did you do in the war, Daddy?" And ignore the war comment, but what did you do in your career? And almost think of something like the climate crisis. And I think being able to look back. Hopefully I've still got a few more years left, but being able to look back and actually point to sort of case studies of genuinely making a difference that I felt make a difference, and it could be those small sort of donations that we gave out to those local communities. I mean, I've got visions with newcleo of some of the community projects and things that we do that can also back up that climate change purpose. But I think it's really that, and being able to demonstrate those real tangibles, and it's actually not those other things that I've achieved already in terms of getting companies into certain indices or winning reporting awards and things like that. I've had some of those recommendations. I've got some companies, I think, into a really good place, and I'm not entirely sure it was definitely the right thing, but how honest that really is in terms of getting into an indices. I think it's quite superficial. It was genuine, but I don't think I'll be able to look back and sort of say that is one of the highlights. I certainly won't be able to say, I managed to fill in a spreadsheet of 1,700 data points and things like that. So I think those are the tangibles for me. And I've got a couple, but there's still a lot more that I want to achieve over the next however many years.
Brilliant, Steve. Well, it sounds, and I know we're gonna touch on newcleo in the next part of the conversation, but it sounds like obviously the vehicle that you're in at the moment to enable those kind of tangible impacts. It sounds like the conditions are there, which is
Yeah.
super exciting. And I actually just want to make a really I think an interesting sort of observation, if you like, about you mentioned that you've got in sustainability, you've got those kind of perhaps overly passionate, idealistic, almost evangelist types, if you like. And then you have those more pragmatic, real world, not to suggest not ambitious, but certainly more pragmatic with the way that they view things. And it sounds to me with newcleo and what you guys are doing, that you actually have something there that you're building, especially with your USP, that really has got a chance to be hugely impactful and to be a dial shifter, if you like. So it's fascinating to hear and to see somebody with still that pragmatic sense about the way they approach their work, working within that context. Was that something, do you think, that newcleo looked at and thought, that's why Steve's for us?
I would hope so. Yeah, that wasn't the explicit part of the interview process or any kind of feedback. I think our mission, it's going to take a few years to get there. The phase of the business that we're in. So I think there's still those pragmatic steps to get to that purpose. So I think that's hopefully why I was brought in, and I think that's why it's so far has been a very good fit. But yeah, it's being surrounded by that inspirational, entrepreneurial, almost disruption of the nuclear industry in terms of what we want to do. But there are ways to get there, especially for a company that's growing so quickly. So yeah, I think that pragmatism is a balance, and I think you're right. I mean, there are other companies in other industries where that almost evangelical type approach works really well. I'm almost jealous of some of the things that some of those companies can demonstrate. But just I've seen it once. A colleague who came in and it just wasn't going to work. You've got to adapt to the culture that you have in your business. For newcleo, we're so young that we are sort of building our culture as we go on, and ESG is going to play a big part in that culture development. So it's slightly different, but yeah, I think if you join a company with a certain sort of mindset, I think in some ways, if you can apply those evangelical type approaches and transform, well done you. But I think in other cases, it's that cliche of sort of shifting the oil tanker, isn't it? You can't do a hard brake right hand turn. You've got to make those slow steps, and you still achieve a lot as well. I think we're maybe getting a bit impatient sometimes, our sustainability managers.
I was just gonna, I couldn't agree with that any less. And I think there's also something. I mean, you talk about culture, and I am rambling on a bit here, but that the fact that you with every new recruit and the onboarding that you described there, that you get the purpose in front of that recruit, and you essentially establish like the degree to which that has led to their decision to join the company. That is all part of building that culture, and the fact that somebody like yourself who has got that pragmatic, and I'm not saying that an evangelical like evangelist type is not going to be truthful, if you like, but for me, I do associate pragmatism with honesty and openness and transparency. It is one of those terms that could easily be pulled into that, and I think if you are helping to influence the cultural development and pulling that kind of pragmatic view and that honest and open view about where you guys are, and I'm not going to use the term journey because you've already dispelled that for us, but where you're headed, I think that's really compelling. That seems like a really compelling mix.
Yeah, and we've actually gone through that process just over the last few months because we're so young and we're building our team, and I think this is a reflection of a slight nervousness of ESG from what I'm seeing in the future. I think ESG is at a little bit of a crossroads. I think it's been at a crossroads before in terms of acceptance within the corporate world, and I think we've passed that test. And ESG is here to stay in whatever form. But at the moment, we are at a crossroads of, I think, potential over compliance and burden. And of course, as like most companies, we are affected by reporting regulations and reporting frameworks, and will be increasingly affected as we grow and our operations go more into Europe. So we brought a reporting sort of lead into the company to pioneer our reporting, to pioneer our communications. And when we started looking at the start of the year, I sort of benchmarked what other companies were doing and saw some job descriptions of. I don't blame the company. I sort of blame where ESG is at the moment, of sort of looking at, we want somebody with a couple of years experience who's done a bit of sustainability communications, but also has some accounting qualifications. And I'm looking at that thinking that's two quite extremes. Lucky if you get a Goldilocks candidate, but I think you've got to make a choice. And we actually, took those benchmarks and altered our job description accordingly and said, look, actually, I think we need to go down the sustainability communications route, that compliance, data gathering. We haven't got the budget, the team yet. Some companies have got large corporate reporting teams. So we, our interviews, and actually we got this a little bit wrong in our first phase, but the second phase was we were looking for people who, we spent the bulk of the interview discussing purpose, your own personal journey type thing, as we've already talked about, and then sort of tacked on that. Do you check the ability of comfortable with working with emissions data, but it really more about, are you able to work with other people across multiple departments, across a number of countries, to collect data, to collect information? Because I still think that there's a massive storytelling piece to all of this, and I think getting that balance right. So our initial approach, and the candidate's due to join in a couple of weeks. I'm really excited. I think she's going to be a superstar for newcleo. But our initial approach is, we need to build our reporting processes and data gather, but you've got to work with a growing business across 4 or 5 countries at the moment. So that's our approach. And I think that's a reflection of ESG, sort of what we say, crossroads, I guess.
It's super interesting, Steve, and I know we're gonna we've had conversations before that's touched on this, and I guess it comes back to, again, that point that you made about even thinking about your career and thinking about the exposure to the S of the ESG and the requirement for those, and you use the term soft skills, but ultimately that appreciation and awareness of how to engage with people, and how that's a core part of, especially within the context of a growing business that's going into an international international phase of operation. Steve, that's super interesting. We've now absolutely cataclysmically gone out of out of our structure of today, which is no problem at all. I do just want, if possible, because I think it does align with a couple of the points that you've made so far when talking about your experience. Can you just introduce the John McGowan article that we shared with you in Forbes, and just to provide our listeners with just a very brief summary, and then perhaps just pick out any of the kind of key reflections that you had?
Yeah, and thanks for sending it, because I remember when it came out and it generated a sort of like a little bit of discussion. The BlackRock chairman letter to investors, calling for energy pragmatism and omitting ESG. So it was good to sort of go back to it and go back to it fresh. So I do remember it generated quite a lot of discussion on LinkedIn and whatever. I think the 2 points that I looked at it, actually 3 points. So the first one is some of the terminology, and this isn't the letter, but the article itself, it immediately launches into non-financial factors, and I think this is one of the problems of ESG and sustainability. Is just another terminology that's confusing, and my ethos is trying to keep it simple and work with colleagues and educate my board, and it's never helpful when you just get another term, and I've never liked non-financial. It just implies that there's no cost to it, where in actual fact there clearly is. Yeah. But I think that there's sort of like 2 scenarios from this letter, and they're both speculation for the emission of ESG. One is the political, that it's a backlash to certainly what's I guess, an extrapolation of EDNI in the US. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an investment strategist, but it seems I'm not sure you can build an investment strategy around potential cancel culture. I don't think this is helpful discourse anyway. As I don't think that would be the reason. I think that might be misinterpreted. And the second one, sort of second potential scenario of why we drop ESG, is partly that terminology confusion. But also, I was looking at this just the other day, and I thought, isn't this what we wanted? Isn't this what ESG and sustainability wants? So sustainability managers, I think we do this tongue in cheek, but we sort of say, if it's so embedded within a company, then you don't need a sustainability department. And actually, I think in some ways we're kind of getting there, because I'm not having to do the elevator pitch amongst my colleagues. I can give this story of the time I got thrown out of the HR director's office for, like, why are you bothering me with this stuff? There's not that kind of reaction anymore. I think everyone sort of gets it in its general form. And the same with the sort of ESG investment. We've taken a long time getting to where we've got to. So moving away from non-financial, sort of packaging them up differently, and getting investors to appreciate these issues and these risks. And in some way, I think in a way it's always been there. I mean, just quickly, I mean, I remember, because I worked alongside my investor relations colleagues and for a company, and we had a poor safety record. We had some mines in Kazakhstan and Russia, and we had one particular accident, which unfortunately resulted in quite a number of deaths. And we were taking calls the next day, and my investor relations colleagues were taking calls, and I was taking calls, and from the responsible investment community. And my calls were more, what's the sheer number of deaths, but also sort of the regulatory impacts, the reputational impacts, and then you would get to loss of production. What does that mean financially? Whereas my investor relations colleagues were taking those calls, but they were jumping those steps, and they were jumping straight. The asset managers and the buy side, sell side analysts were jumping straight to, what does that mean for loss of production? Where's the remaining coal production going to come from in the short term? How long is the mine going to be? So we're ultimately getting to the same point, just a different way, and those additional steps. So, I think going back, I mean, isn't this ultimately what ESG should be? Good ESG management is good business management. A good investment strategy, or good ESG investment strategy, should be a good investment strategy. So getting hung up about whether it's an ESG risk or a corporate risk, is not helpful. And I think we're getting to the point, hopefully getting to the point, where they're just all under one banner, all under risks and opportunities. And you've seen, I've been involved in those conversations years ago, talking about climate change with potential investors. Didn't take it seriously at all 20 years ago. And now, look at all these climate funds. You sort of think, where were you 20 years ago? So, there is that evolution. So I'm maybe misinterpreting the letter somewhat and speculating, but I'd like to think that this is ultimately where it should go, that you're not separating them out, and then you're not having all the different terminology and confusion. That's kind of like a dream, I guess.
I think, Steve, first of all, that was a brilliant synopsis, and you certainly picked out, for me, the most salient, most interesting points. I think that whole point about language is so key. And yes, ultimately, we want the terms relating to ESG to become redundant, because ultimately it's not ESG practice, it's good business practice and good corporate practice. I do think that letter, though, from my reading of it, for Larry Fink's letter, what was, I guess, slightly, and it comes back to language, but was slightly concerning from my perspective reading it, was the fact that he seemed to be replacing ESG related terminology with new terminology, as you've alluded to, and I know that we are all able to pick these things up and ultimately understand them, climate investing, etc. But it is more complexity. It is more moving the dials, shifting the focus, etc. In a time when, in all honesty, and coming back to some of the things that you talked about, we need to be able to call a spade, and we need to all have collective appreciation and understanding of what these themes are, what these issues are, so that we can all make collective decisions better. Is that, from your point of view, thinking about like the use of language, the transparency that ensues through being consistent, is that a concern that comes from seeing someone like BlackRock doing this?
Yeah, I've always been concerned about this. I think sort of alluded to it right at the start when I said we just flipped from calling ourselves an environmental consultancy to a CSR consultancy. And then I think I worked at a company a few years later where we spent a lot of time deciding whether we should call ourselves a corporate social responsibility department or a corporate responsibility department, and in a back and fro about to and fro about what the S meant. It's really not helpful, and so I've been involved in this 20 years, and it still crops up. Funnily enough, it's my opening slide to my graduates last week. It's just a word cloud of all of this terminology, and actually, there's some. Immediately going into newcleo, it was clear that there was some geographic differences between France, Italy, and the UK. It was great the company was looking for an ESG manager. It's great the company had an ESG committee. I don't know whether ESG is strictly the right term. However, I don't want to spend weeks and months determining that. So what we've actually done is, look, these are all the terms out there. This is ESG. This is what we're going with. And this is what it means to us. And in really simple terms, this is environmental impact, this is social impact, and this is governance in terms of accountability. You interpret it how you want, but this is roughly what it is. This is our ESG strategy. This is our framework. This is how we're moving forward. I don't think there is any value in looking at this terminology and going to, analyzing it to death. I think you just have to work with what you've got. And at the moment, I'm sort of selling this as, again, as a reflection of the onboarding conversation and with my graduates, is I don't know what departments they're all in. Some are in Manchester, some are in London, some are in our Gloucester office, some work in procurement, some in communications. So ESG for our business may directly affect your role. It might indirectly affect your role. But this is roughly what it is. And this is what I expect of you. This is what you should expect of us. And actually, I've already tested it because I know they already wanted to join the company for that purpose. So that's a tick. But what I've been trying to get across, because I get half an hour with these people, it's just about making better choices. It's about making better choices in your business life. And that could be the simple things about how you choose to travel to another office or what recycling bin you use, to the more impactful things about what suppliers you use or who we choose as a company to partner with. And then also what we try and get across, because we're building this culture, is we like to see best practice outside of work, not just what you do in your home life, but maybe some of those home life ideas that you can bring to work. And we're not just talking about environment, but the well-being and things like that. And so in the half an hour that I get for the onboarding, I sort of start up that I know this is confusing. I've got this word cloud of all these terminology, and I point to I've had 80% of those job titles, and I can't tell you the difference between them. So I almost feel sorry for them, and I feel nervous. I mean, and even more seriously is when I go to C-suite and board. And I don't want to go to them with various different terminologies. I don't want to go to them with 12 different reporting frameworks. You haven't got much time. So you need to get to the point. So you need to keep it simple. Not so simple that you lose all the nuances about what you're trying to do. But, you don't get much time with the CEO, if at all. So use it wisely. Keep this simple. And I just don't think this industry has been very helpful to itself over the last 20 years to keep on regurgitating this and bringing up another term. I've got no more space in my word cloud.
Steve, it's brilliant. It's really interesting. We one of the slight plug here, but one of the decisions that we made fairly early doors with the original Green Claims policies that we produced with our signatories of the charter, it was decided that based upon the nuance or the difference in even terminology that people were using relating to particular terms, the definitions that were at play, that it was a necessity for all of our signatories to detail the definitions that they as an organization wanted to use for these particular terms. Because as you say, that then becomes something that even if there is no consensus perhaps on the use of these terms and exactly what they mean, then at least anyone within the organization or engaging with the organization can understand what you mean when you refer to X, Y, or Z.
Yeah,
So
I think that's a good approach.
it's a key approach. Steve, really interesting. As alluded to, we've obliterated our timings for today. We could carry on, and I know we've only scratched the very surface when it comes to this conversation. Hope you've enjoyed the experience, and we might be able to convince you to come back on for another episode. But let me finish with the magic wand question. Steve, if we were to hand you that magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would it be?
Yeah, this is a really tough question. Obviously, you sent it to me in advance, so it's one I've been racking my brains. I think the hardest thing is getting it down to one. I'll be a little bit cheeky. I think if I can have two, I think one is the first one as a purely sustainability ESG manager. If I could go to if I could use my magic wand, I would go to some of these reporting regulation authorities and say, "Can you just stop for just 10 minutes, please? Don't need another reporting framework or another acronym, so just stop." But I think, more seriously, in terms of wider corporate one, we're talking about simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think business case for ESG, three, in my mind, three pillars. So the economic, operational efficiencies, capital investment, recruitment, retention, very clear economic. There is obviously the second legal and regulatory sort of pillar, and that's becoming more stringent for all businesses. And I think there's a third one, and I never used to lead with this. I don't think it would have been very helpful, but I think there's a moral piece to all of this. I certainly didn't have any emotion in my initial analysis when I was a responsible investment analyst. That wouldn't have gone down well with those conversations that I'd had. But I think it links back to everybody's sustainability managers sort of like underlying passion. And I think the first stakeholder meeting that I ever had when I worked for an environmental consultant, and we went to on behalf of our clients, we sat down in the office, and I can't remember the precisely the stakeholder, but he looked at us and he said, "Oh, you're here to talk to me about ethics, are you?" And it was so condescending. And when we sort of laughed as we walked out of the office, did you mean ethics or, the county next to Hertfordshire? He just really didn't care. But I think that moral piece actually over the last sort of 20 years it shouldn't shy away from that. I think corporate agendas are clearly impacted by global trends. I think in particular, sort of inequality. And we started to see that with, purpose over profit type commitments. And I think we're just going into a world that is so unequal that you can almost have, CEOs and company corporate agendas that pull out that moral piece. So I think not wanting to come across as too evangelical, because I think I've used about 54 minutes to describe pragmatism. But I think that is something you could actually circle back to and not be afraid to put as one of those things forward. That morality piece to all of this. It's essentially about doing the right, as I say, making the right choices, making better choices, doing the right thing. If we're keeping it simple, then that would probably be my magic wand.
Was that, Steve? And I just want to pick you up on that because I love that, and I think you can still have a pragmatic view and consider the importance of moral decision making within an organization, within a society, within a corporate environment, if you like. Out of interest, you've alluded to newcleo. Was that the sort of the moral sort of intention, compass, drive, if you like, of the founder of newcleo? Was that part of the attraction of working with him?
Yeah, I mean, we've already got that language. It's slightly different interpretation, but the moral imperative to sort of disrupt the nuclear industry. Look at nuclear in the UK in particular. It's very expensive. It takes a long time to get up and running. And how do we do things differently? Attract 800 people in 3 years to a company with that purpose. So that slightly different interpretations of morality, but actually that was a hook for me, because that morality, that third pillar of that business case. I know some of my peers, I had conversations with them recently, would not be so forward with that, very reluctant to put that morality piece. It's not about tugging at heartstrings, it's almost going against building that business case. But as I say, purpose over profit kind of trends, and companies that can really demonstrate, still do good things and make money for CEOs and boards and shareholders and employees, and typical sort of sustainability brands. It can be done, and can be done across industry. So yeah, certainly a hook, and one that we've been sort of using as we build almost like our storytelling, I guess.
Steve, we're going to leave it there. That was absolutely brilliant. As I say, only touching the surface, but thank you very much for joining us today. That was a really good one. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for letting me wax lyrical.